I learned the truth standing on my own front lawn, keys still warm in my hand, my heart full of news that would have changed everything if I hadn't heard what I heard first. I had just come from the estate office, the kind of place that smells like old paper and final decisions. My brother, my only sibling, had left me everything: the house, the land, the accounts. A future I never expected to have at this age. For a few beautiful minutes, I sat in my car and let myself imagine what relief felt like. No more counting pennies. No more quiet panic when the roof leaked or the car made a strange sound. I thought of helping my son Caleb, of finally giving without fear. I stepped out of the car smiling. That smile didn't survive the walk to the porch. The front window was open. I hadn't noticed at first. Then I heard voices, familiar ones carried casually into the afternoon air, careless and unguarded. Caleb's voice, Lydia's laugh. I stopped moving. Something in my chest tightened the way it does before bad news lands. "I'm telling you," Lydia said, her tone light but sharp underneath. "I can't live like this much longer." Caleb sighed. "I know, just be patient." Patient. I stayed where I was, hidden by the angle of the window, my body frozen while my life cracked open. "She's here all the time," Lydia continued. "Every room feels borrowed. I can't even breathe without feeling like I'm being watched." "That's my mother," Caleb said, but there was no heat in it, no defense. "I know," Lydia replied. "And she's done her part. She raised you. That doesn't mean she gets to stay forever." I pressed my hand to the porch railing. The wood felt rough, solid, real. I needed something to hold me in place. Caleb chuckled softly. "It's not like she'll be around forever." The words landed with terrifying ease. They weren't arguing, they weren't whispering, they were planning. "She still thinks this is temporary," Lydia said. "That we're getting back on our feet." "It's been 3 years, Caleb." "I know," he said again, "but legally the house is still in her name. We can't just—" "Not yet," Lydia interrupted. "But there are ways." I didn't breathe. "She's getting older," Lydia continued. "We start pointing out little things: forgetfulness, confusion, concern. We say we're worried, we suggest help." "You mean a home," Caleb said quietly. "A place with structure," Lydia corrected. "Care. Supervision. It would be for her own good." For my own good. I felt dizzy. My knees threatened to give way, but I forced myself to stay upright. I had survived harder moments than this, or at least I thought I had. "And the money?" Caleb asked. "Her social security won't cover much." "It doesn't have to," Lydia said. "Once she's out, we can manage the rest, sell what needs selling, simplify." Simplify. They were discussing my life the way people discuss clutter. "She trusts you," Lydia added. "That's the key. She won't question it if it comes from you." Caleb was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was steady. "She always signs things without reading too closely." I closed my eyes. I had come home ready to share the happiest news I'd had in decades. Instead, I was standing outside my own house listening to my son explain how easily I could be erased. I didn't go inside right away. I couldn't. I needed a moment to understand what I had just heard, not as a misunderstanding or a bad day or stress talking, but as a truth finally spoken out loud. I raised Caleb alone. His father died when Caleb was 4. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. I patched clothes instead of buying new ones. I skipped meals so he wouldn't notice the money was tight. I told myself love meant endurance. That sacrifice was invisible by design. I never taught him that loyalty should go both ways. Inside the house, Lydia laughed again. "We just have to be smart about timing." Timing. That word followed me as I finally turned the key in the door. "I'm home," I called, my voice steady enough to fool them, and for a moment myself. They both looked up, smiling too quickly. "Hey, Mom," Caleb said. "How was your appointment?" "Fine," I replied. "Everything went smoothly." Lydia stood and kissed my cheek. Her perfume was the one I bought her last Christmas. "We were just talking about dinner," she said. "You must be tired." I was tired. But not in the way she meant. We ate together that night. I served the meal. I listened. I nodded. I watched them the way you watch strangers on a train, carefully, without attachment, noticing details you once overlooked. Caleb didn't ask what the appointment was about. Lydia didn't ask if I needed anything. They talked about future plans as if I wasn't sitting at the table. Afterward, I washed the dishes alone. That night, I lay awake replaying every word I'd heard through that open window. Every assumption I'd made about family loyalty shifted quietly into place. By morning, the shock had settled into something else. Clarity. I didn't confront them, I didn't cry, I didn't ask why. Instead, I made a phone call. Robert Hale's office, the receptionist said. Yes, I replied. I'd like to schedule a follow-up regarding my inheritance. As soon as possible? I hung up and sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, breathing evenly. I had spent my life believing generosity would be returned in kind. Now I understood something far more important. Generosity without boundaries teaches people exactly how to use you. And as I looked around the house I once thought was shared, I made a quiet decision, one that would change the balance of power completely. They thought time was on their side. They were wrong. And that was the moment I stopped being patient. The next morning I woke before anyone else. That wasn't unusual. Years of early shifts and worry had trained my body to rise before the sun, but the feeling was different. I didn't wake with dread or obligation. I woke with awareness. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that used to feel peaceful but now felt revealing, like a room after someone has admitted something they can't take back. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I had helped Caleb with homework, where I had paid bills late into the night, where I had reassured him again and again that everything would be fine. I wrapped my hands around the mug and stared at the wood grain, thinking about how easily people confuse familiarity with permanence. Caleb and Lydia slept upstairs, secure in the belief that I was exactly who they thought I was, tired, predictable, grateful for scraps of affection. They believed time was on their side. That belief made them careless. By mid-morning, Lydia came down first, already dressed, already polished. She smiled when she saw me, that careful public smile she wore like armor. "You're up early," she said lightly. "I always am," I replied. She poured herself coffee without asking, something she had started doing months ago, as if the house had slowly become hers by default. "Caleb has an interview this afternoon," she added. "We're hopeful." I nodded. I had nodded for years. "That's good," I said. She studied me for a second longer than necessary, her eyes sharp, searching for something, weakness maybe. Then she looked away, satisfied. Caleb came down soon after, yawning, already half distracted. He kissed my cheek absent-mindedly. "Morning, Mom. Morning." He sat across from me and scrolled on his phone. "You had that appointment yesterday, right? Everything okay?" There it was, casual, uninvested. "Yes," I said, "everything is in order." He smiled, relieved, not because he cared what the appointment meant for me, but because in order meant no complications for him. "That's good," he said, "less stress." Less stress for him. They left together late morning, Lydia reminding me to rest, Caleb reminding me not to forget to lock the door. The irony almost made me laugh. Once they were gone, I moved through the house slowly, deliberately. I wasn't cleaning. I was noticing. How many of my things had been moved to make room for theirs, how often I had been asked gently, politely to adjust, to compromise, to be understanding. I had mistaken adaptation for harmony. By noon, I was sitting in Robert Hale's office again. He was calm as always, glasses low on his nose, voice steady. "You're certain?" he asked. "I am," I said. "Completely." We went through everything carefully. The inheritance, the accounts, the property, the legal protections I could put in place immediately. He explained without drama, without judgment, as if this were simply another case, which to him it was. To me, it was my life rearranging itself. "You should know," he said gently, "that once assets are secured, no one can act on your behalf without explicit consent. Not family, not spouses, no one." "Good," I replied. "That's exactly what I want." When I left his office, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, the kind of steadiness that comes from finally standing on ground you didn't realize was yours. On the way home, I stopped by Marian Holt's house. Marian took one look at my face and didn't ask polite questions. She never did. "What happened?" she said. I told her, not with emotion, just facts. She listened, arms crossed, jaw tight. "And you heard all of this with your own ears?" she asked when I finished. "Yes." She shook her head slowly. "Then stop doubting yourself. People don't accidentally plan betrayals." "I'm not doubting," I said. "I'm deciding." Marian reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Good, because they've been deciding for you for a long time." That evening, Caleb and Lydia returned full of forced optimism. The interview went well. Dinner was ordered in. They ate, talked, planned. I watched them carefully now, not with hurt but with clarity. Every word they said assumed I would always be here, always accommodating, always quiet. They had no idea that while they spoke, everything they relied on was already shifting. As I went to bed that night, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry, I was finished. And there is a difference people don't recognize until it's too late. I didn't confront them. That was the first decision that truly belonged to me. For years, whenever something felt wrong, I had believed the answer was honesty. Speak up. Clear the air, give people the benefit of the doubt. I had done that my entire life, with my husband when money was tight, with my son when he struggled, with myself when exhaustion felt like failure. But standing there that afternoon, with Robert Hale's calm voice still echoing in my ears, I understood something I hadn't before. Confrontation gives people a chance to lie better. Silence gives you time to act. So when I came home, I did exactly what they expected. I set my purse down in the same place by the door. I washed my hands at the sink. I took the chicken out of the freezer and began dinner as if nothing inside me had shifted. Lydia was at the table scrolling on her phone, her legs crossed neatly, posture perfect. She looked up and smiled the smile she used when she wanted to appear considerate without actually engaging. "You're back early," she said. "Everything okay? Everything?" The word almost made me laugh. "Yes," I replied evenly, "just errands." Caleb came in a few minutes later, loosening his tie, already tired despite having accomplished very little that day. He kissed my cheek out of habit, not affection. "Hey, Mom," I nodded. "How did the interview go?" He shrugged. "Fine, I guess. They said they'd let me know." They always said that. I returned to the stove, stirring slowly, deliberately. The smell of garlic filled the kitchen. The familiar rhythm steadied me. Lydia launched into a story about someone at work who had annoyed her. I listened with the same attentiveness I always had, nodding at the right moments, offering neutral responses. She spoke as if nothing were amiss, as if she hadn't been discussing my future behind my back like a scheduling inconvenience. At one point, she gestured toward the living room. "I was thinking," she said casually, "that eventually we should replace the couch. It's a little dated." Replace, not move, not update. Replace, as if the house were already hers to redesign. Caleb nodded immediately. "Yeah, makes sense. We'll get around to it." I said nothing. I served dinner. We ate together like a family, forks clinking against plates, conversation light and shallow. I watched them carefully, not with anger, but with clarity. Caleb avoided my eyes when finances came up. Lydia leaned back in her chair when I mentioned plans, her body language subtly territorial. They spoke about the future as if I were a fixed object in the background, like the walls or the ceiling, present but not permanent. After dinner, I cleared the plates myself. Lydia offered a half-hearted, "I can help if you want," already standing up, already moving away. "I've got it," I said. I always had. That night I lay awake listening to the house settle. Pipes ticking, floorboards creaking, sounds I knew intimately because I had paid for every inch of them. I thought about the manila folder tucked safely away in my drawer, about Robert Hale's careful phrasing, about how many years I had spent assuming loyalty was automatic. It wasn't, it was conditional, and the conditions were no longer in my favor. The next morning I woke before anyone else. I dressed quietly, chose clothes that looked ordinary, nothing that suggested anything had changed. I made coffee and sat at the table alone, watching sunlight move across the floor. At 9 o'clock, I left the house without explanation. Robert Hale's office was exactly as I remembered, quiet, orderly, efficient. He didn't waste words, he never had. "I want to be very clear," I told him once I was seated. "I'm not angry, I'm not looking for revenge. I just want certainty." He nodded. "That's usually when people make the strongest decisions." We reviewed everything slowly, deeds, accounts, authority, protections I had never needed before because I had trusted the wrong people. "Your son currently has no legal claim," Robert said, "but without safeguards, assumptions can turn into pressure. Pressure turns into mistakes." "I won't be pressured," I said. "I believe you," he replied. "But it's wise to remove the opportunity." By the time I left his office, my future no longer felt theoretical. It was documented. When I returned home, Lydia was on the phone, her voice lowered. She paused when she saw me, then smiled brightly and hung up. "Everything okay?" she asked again. "Yes," I said again. This time I meant something different. That evening, Marion Holt called. She had known me longer than anyone outside my family. She heard things in my voice others missed. "You sound quieter," she said. "I'm thinking," I replied. "That usually means something's wrong." "No," I said, "it means something's finally clear." She was silent for a moment. Then, gently, "Are they treating you right?" I looked around the house, the walls I had painted myself, the table I had refinished, the space I had built piece by piece. "They're treating me the way I've allowed," I said. "That's not the same thing," Marion replied firmly. "No," I agreed. "It isn't." After we hung up, I sat alone and made a list not of grievances but of facts. Who paid the mortgage? Who covered the bills? Who adjusted their life when others failed? Facts don't argue, they simply exist. Over the next few days, I watched patterns emerge more clearly than ever. Caleb began asking more questions, casual ones. About paperwork, about accounts, about planning ahead. Lydia started offering help with things she had never shown interest in before. "If you want," she said one afternoon, "I could organize your files. It might make things easier for everyone." Easier for everyone, not for me, I thanked her and declined. Each time I saw a flicker of irritation cross her face before it smoothed back into politeness. They were adjusting, testing. They sensed something had shifted, even if they didn't yet know what. That night, as I locked my bedroom door, I realized something quietly profound. They thought my silence meant weakness. They had no idea it was preparation. And for the first time since my husband died, I wasn't bracing for what might happen to me. I was deciding what would. The house was quiet, but beneath that quiet, something irreversible had already begun. And they were still sitting comfortably inside a future that was no longer theirs. The first real mistake they made was assuming my patience meant permission. It happened 3 days later, quietly, the way most betrayals do. I was in the den folding laundry when Caleb appeared in the doorway, hands tucked into his pockets, posture casual in a way that immediately put me on alert. He didn't sit. He hovered. "Mom," he said, "can I ask you something?" I kept folding. "You just did." He smiled faintly like he was humoring me. "You know what I mean." I waited. He shifted his weight. "Lydia and I were talking, and we think it might be a good idea to plan ahead a little." I didn't look up. "Plan for what?" "For the future," he said quickly. "Just practical stuff. You know, making sure everything's in order so there aren't problems later." Later, that word again, always later, never now. I folded the towel precisely and set it aside. "Problems like what?" "Well," he hesitated, "legal things. Paperwork, if something happened unexpectedly." I finally looked at him then, really looked. His eyes flicked away. "Nothing's happened," I said calmly. "I'm healthy." "Of course," he replied, too fast. "We just think it's smart to be prepared." That was when Lydia entered, as if on cue. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely, expression soft and supportive. "We don't want you worrying about things you don't have to," she said. "Caleb's just trying to help." "Help?" I nodded once. "What kind of help?" Caleb cleared his throat. "We were thinking about a power of attorney just in case. That way, if you ever needed assistance, I could handle things for you." There it was, not shouted, not demanded, slipped gently onto the table like something reasonable. I let the silence stretch. I could feel Lydia watching my face, searching for cracks. "A power of attorney gives someone control," I said finally, "over finances, property, medical decisions." Caleb nodded. "Only if you want it to." "I don't," I replied. Lydia's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before she recovered. "It's just a suggestion, no pressure." "Good," I said, "because the answer is no." Caleb frowned. "Mom, you don't even want to hear the details?" "I know the details," I said evenly. "I don't need someone managing my life." The room felt tighter after that. Lydia straightened. "You're taking this personally?" "I am personal," I said. "It's my life." Caleb exhaled, frustrated. "You're being defensive." "No," I replied. "I'm being clear." They exchanged a look, one I had seen too many times before. The look that said she doesn't get it. "Think about it," Lydia said, already stepping back. "No rush." But there was rush in her eyes, urgency. After they left the room, I sat still for a long time, my hands resting in my lap. They hadn't asked if I wanted help. They had assumed I'd eventually give in. That night, Marion Holt came over with a loaf of bread and zero patience. She took one look at my face and set the bread down without a word. "They asked, didn't they?" she said. "Yes." "For control?" "Yes." She sat across from me, her gaze steady. Alina, listen to me, this is where it starts, polite concern. Just in case, you say yes once and suddenly your life isn't yours anymore. I know, I said quietly. She leaned forward. Then don't hesitate, you need to move faster than they expect. I already am. That got her attention. I told her everything, not the hurt, not the emotions, but the facts, the attorney, the documents, the decisions already in motion. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. Good, she said. Because once people start circling, they don't stop. The next morning, I called Robert Hale again. I need one more thing, I told him. I want to make sure no one can claim I wasn't competent when I made these decisions. Already anticipated, he replied. I'll arrange a formal evaluation, discreet, documented. By the time I hung up, I felt something unfamiliar, relief. Over the next week, the pressure increased. Caleb became attentive in a way that felt rehearsed. He asked how I slept, offered to run errands, suggested rides to appointments I didn't have. Lydia became sweetness personified, cooking meals, complimenting my clothes, talking about how lucky we were to have each other. They were building a narrative, one where they were the caretakers, one where I was slowly becoming the problem. And I let them, because every smile they offered only confirmed what I already knew. They weren't worried about me, they were worried about losing access. The moment that confirmed everything came on a quiet afternoon. I returned home earlier than expected and heard voices in the kitchen before I opened the door. Lydia's voice was low, controlled. She said no again. Caleb's tone was sharp. Then we have to be smarter. What if she changes her will? Lydia asked. There was a pause. She won't, Caleb said. She wouldn't do that to me. I stood there, keys in my hand, listening. She owes me, he continued. Everything I have came from her, she wouldn't cut me off. Lydia sighed. Don't underestimate people when they finally stop sacrificing. I stepped inside then, their voices cut off instantly. Oh, Lydia said brightly, you're home early? Yes, I replied. I am. Caleb avoided my eyes. I smiled at both of them, and in that moment I knew something they didn't. They were racing against time, and they were already losing, because the future they were planning for themselves no longer included my cooperation. And soon it wouldn't include my house either. The only question left wasn't whether they'd realize it. It was how loudly everything would fall apart when they did. Once you see people clearly, you stop needing them to explain themselves. The house shifted after that afternoon. Not in any visible way, furniture stayed where it was, routines continued, but something underneath had changed. The air felt tighter, as if everyone were moving carefully around an invisible line. Caleb became quieter, not gentler, just cautious. He watched me now the way someone watches a door they're afraid might lock behind them. When I entered a room, his conversations stopped. When I left the house, he asked where I was going. Casual questions asked too often. Lydia, on the other hand, leaned harder into performance. She smiled more, touched my arm when she spoke. Started calling me Mom again, a word she had quietly stopped using months earlier. She brought up memories, shared plans, talked about family traditions with the enthusiasm of someone building a case. One morning at breakfast, she said, "We've been so lucky to have you here with us." I stirred my tea. "Have you?" Her smile didn't waver. "Of course." Caleb nodded. "We don't say it enough." "No," I said softly. "You don't?" They both froze just for a second. I stood, rinsed my cup, and left the room. That afternoon, Marian Holt called. "They're escalating," she said without greeting. "Yes," I replied. "But they're also panicking." "Good," she said. "That's when people make mistakes." She was right. The mistake came 2 days later. I returned from the grocery store to find Lydia seated at the dining table with a folder in front of her. Caleb stood nearby, arms crossed, jaw tight. "We need to talk," Lydia said gently. I set my bags down slowly. "Do we?" Caleb exhaled. "Mom, please just hear us out." I took a seat across from them. Lydia slid the folder toward me. "We found some information that might help you feel more comfortable." I didn't open it. "What kind of information?" I asked. "About simplifying things," she said. "Managing assets. Making sure everything's protected." "Protected from whom?" I asked. She hesitated. "Caleb jumped in. From stress, from mistakes, from people who might take advantage of you." I looked at my son. "Is that what you think I am?" "Vulnerable?" "No," he said quickly. "Just aging." That word landed heavier than he expected. I nodded once. And what happens after it's simplified? Lydia folded her hands. Then you wouldn't have to worry anymore. No, I corrected. Then you wouldn't. Silence. Caleb leaned forward. Why are you doing this? He asked, frustration leaking through. Why are you suddenly acting like we're the enemy? I'm not acting, I said. I'm responding. To what? Lydia asked, voice tight. To reality? Caleb pushed his chair back slightly. This isn't fair. No, I agreed. It isn't. Fair would have been honesty. Lydia's mask slipped then, just barely. You're being dramatic, she said. We're trying to help you and you're turning it into something ugly. I met her gaze. You don't help someone by trying to control them. Caleb stood abruptly. Enough. If you won't cooperate, then we'll have to make other arrangements. The words hung in the air. Other arrangements? I repeated. For living situations, Lydia said coolly. This setup clearly isn't working anymore. I smiled. That surprised them? You're right, I said. It isn't. That evening, I met Robert Hale in his office for the final time. Everything was ready. The sale documents, the trust confirmations, the relocation plan. He slid a folder across the desk. Once this is executed, there's nothing they can do, no leverage, no claims. I nodded. Good. He studied me for a moment. You're handling this with remarkable calm. I've had a lifetime of practice, I said. When I left, the sky was just beginning to darken. I didn't go home right away. I sat in my car and let myself feel it, not grief, not rage, but the quiet certainty that comes when a decision has already been made. I wasn't losing anything, I was reclaiming it. The final conversation happened that night. I called Caleb and Lydia into the living room. They sat together on the couch, guarded, defensive. I won't be signing anything, I said, not now. Not ever. Caleb opened his mouth to argue. I'm also making changes, I continued. Permanent ones. Lydia stiffened. What kind of changes? The kind that don't require consensus. Caleb stood. You can't just, I can, I said, and I have. The silence that followed was thick, expectant. What does that mean? Lydia asked. It means, I said calmly, that the future you're planning does not include my resources, my home, or my consent. Caleb's face flushed. You're choosing this over your own son? I looked at him. I'm choosing myself. That night I packed a single suitcase. I slept peacefully for the first time in months, and somewhere in the quiet I knew they still thought this was a negotiation. They still believed time was on their side. They had no idea that everything they assumed was guaranteed had already slipped beyond their reach. And when they finally realized it, there would be no room left to argue, only consequences waiting patiently at the door. The morning everything broke open began like any other, quiet, careful, pretending. I woke before anyone else, the house still holding its breath. The early light came through the kitchen window in pale strips, landing on the same counter I had wiped down 1,000 times, the same floor I had scrubbed on my knees after long shifts years ago. This house had memory baked into its walls, and today it would no longer belong to any of us. I made coffee and sat at the table alone. My suitcase stood by the door, small, unassuming. I hadn't packed much. I didn't need to. What mattered was already secured legally, quietly, irrevocably. When Caleb came downstairs, he stopped short when he saw the suitcase. What's that? He asked. My things, I said. He frowned. Why are they by the door? I'm leaving. The word landed hard. Lydia appeared behind him, robe tied neatly, hair brushed just enough to look composed. Her eyes went straight to the suitcase, then back to my face. Leaving where? She asked. Out, I said simply. Caleb's voice sharpened. Mom, don't do this. Do what? Create drama, Lydia said. This doesn't have to be so extreme. I sipped my coffee. It does. Caleb ran a hand through his hair. You're overreacting. We just had a disagreement. You attempted control, I said. That's not a disagreement. Lydia crossed her arms. You're blowing this out of proportion. No, I replied. I'm finally seeing it in proportion. Caleb stepped closer. You can't just walk out. This is your home. For now, I said. That stopped him. What does that mean? He asked. I stood, picked up my cup, and rinsed it slowly. I let the sound of running water stretch the moment. Let uncertainty do its work. It means, I said, turning back to them, that nothing stays still forever. The buyer arrived at 10. I wasn't home by then. Robert Hale met me at a quiet office across town. The final signatures were already prepared. I read them carefully as I always had, then I signed. The pen felt heavier than I expected. Once this is filed, Robert said, ownership transfers immediately. I nodded. Good. He hesitated. Do you want me present when you inform them? No, I said. They'll find out soon enough. By the time I returned to the house, the locks had not yet been changed, but the future already had. Caleb was pacing when I walked in. Where did you go? He demanded. Business, I replied. Lydia was seated, phone in hand. She looked up slowly. We need to talk. I know, I said. So do I. They exchanged a glance. I didn't sit. This house has been sold, I said. The silence that followed was absolute. Caleb laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. That's not funny. It's not a joke. Lydia's phone slipped from her hand and hit the table. You can't do that. I already did. Caleb's face flushed. You didn't consult us? No, I agreed. I didn't. You don't get to make decisions like that without us, Lydia snapped. I looked at her calmly. Watch me, Caleb's voice cracked. Where are we supposed to go? I tilted my head. I assume you've been planning for independence. That's not the same, he said. No, I replied. It's just inconvenient. Lydia stood abruptly. This is cruel. No, I said. Cruel is treating generosity like entitlement. Caleb slammed his hand on the table. You're punishing us. I'm protecting myself. The accusations came fast after that I was unstable. That I was manipulated by Marion Holt. That Robert Hale had put ideas in my head. I let them talk. When the noise finally ran out, I said, You have 30 days. That's more than I was given emotionally. Caleb stared at me like he didn't recognize the woman in front of him. Who are you? He asked. I answered honestly. Someone who finally listened. I left that day with no dramatic exit. No shouting, no tears, just the sound of the door closing behind me, soft, final. I stayed with Marion that night. She poured tea and said nothing until I spoke first. It's done, I said. She nodded. I know, I don't feel guilty, I admitted. I thought I would. You shouldn't, she said. You didn't take anything from them, you stopped giving. That night I slept deeply. The calls started the next morning. Caleb first, then Lydia. Then messages layered with urgency, apology, anger. I didn't answer. Not because I was afraid, but because the conversation had already ended. Robert confirmed the filing by noon. By evening, the buyers had scheduled renovations. By the end of the week, the house would no longer hold my name, and somehow, instead of grief, I felt light. On the 7th day, Caleb showed up at Marion's door. He looked smaller somehow, less certain. I just want to talk, he said. I stepped outside. He didn't apologize right away. He talked about stress, pressure, misunderstandings. I listened. When he finished, I said, You never asked how I was. He looked down. That's the truth that matters, I said. Not the excuses. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I love you, he said finally. I know, I replied, but love without respect is just possession. I went back inside. 2 weeks later, I stood on the porch of my new home. Quiet, open, mine, no expectations hanging in the air, no footsteps I had to anticipate, just space. As I set my suitcase down, I understood something I had waited a lifetime to learn. Being generous does not mean being available for harm, and family loyalty is not proven by endurance but by mutual care. They thought I would bend. They thought time would wear me down. They were wrong. Because when a woman stops asking permission to protect herself, there is nothing left to take from her, and everything left to lose for those who underestimated her. The first notice arrived 3 days after I left, slid under Marion Holt's door like a quiet threat dressed in legal language. And when I read Caleb Whitmore's name printed beside the phrase request for mediation, I felt nothing at all, not anger, not fear, not even sadness, only a strange confirmation that people rarely seek peace until they realize control has slipped from their hands. And in that moment, I understood something important. This was not about reconciliation, it was about panic. Marion watched me read the letter, her arms crossed, her mouth set in that familiar line she used when she was holding back words she already knew wouldn't change my mind. And when I folded the paper and set it on the table without comment, she asked softly, Are you going to answer? I shook my head once and said, No, because answering would suggest negotiation, and there was nothing left to negotiate. Caleb tried again 2 days later, this time through Robert Hale, who called not to pressure me but to inform me, his voice calm and even as always, that my son believed the sale had been rushed, that he claimed emotional distress, that he wanted to talk through options. And when Robert paused, waiting for my response, I told him, "Tell him the options ended when respect did." And Robert did not argue, only replied, "Understood." The way professionals do when they recognize finality. Lydia Whitmore sent no letters at first, no calls, no apologies, but I felt her presence anyway in the silence, in the sudden disappearance of my name from shared accounts, in the subtle rewrites happening behind the scenes. And it didn't surprise me when the narrative shifted, when distant relatives began asking cautious questions, when I heard through Marion that Lydia had told people I was confused, overwhelmed, taken advantage of. Because when control fails, reputation becomes the next battlefield. What they didn't know, what they could not know, was that every move they made only reinforced the decision I had already completed in ink and law, that my accounts were sealed, my will revised, my future documented beyond reach, and that no amount of revisionist storytelling could undo the truth recorded in signatures and timestamps. The mediation request expired unanswered, the legal window closing quietly, and when Caleb showed up unannounced at Marion's place again, this time without anger, without posture, just exhaustion etched into his face. I met him at the door and stepped outside so the conversation would not contaminate the space where I was rebuilding myself. And he told me he didn't sleep, that things weren't going well, that the buyers were firm, that Lydia was furious, that everything had fallen apart faster than he expected. And when he said, "I never thought you'd actually go through with it," I answered honestly, "That's because you never believed I had a life outside of what I gave you." And that was when his eyes finally dropped, not in shame, but in recognition. He asked me if there was any chance I would reconsider, any possibility I would help them get back on their feet. And I told him something I had never said out loud before, something I had only learned after leaving. "I already helped you," I said, "for decades, and you mistook endurance for obligation." And when he tried to speak again, I raised my hand and said, "This is where it stops." Because boundaries do not require consensus, only clarity. After he left, Marion sat beside me and said, "They're unraveling," and I nodded, not with satisfaction but with understanding, because unraveling is what happens when people build their lives on someone else's silence, and silence finally breaks. The next week, Robert confirmed that the last asset transfer was complete, that there were no outstanding claims, no leverage remaining, and as I stood in the small kitchen of my new home that evening, unpacking plates I had chosen for myself, I felt something unfamiliar settle into my chest. Not victory, not relief, but peace without conditions, the kind that doesn't ask you to perform or prove your worth. I thought about the woman I had been inside that old house, how carefully I had folded myself to fit around other people's comfort, how often I had told myself love meant patience, how many times I had mistaken being needed for being valued. And I realized that this chapter of my life had not ended with loss, but with authorship, because for the first time, I was no longer reacting to other people's decisions, I was making my own. And somewhere, even without knowing it yet, Caleb and Lydia were learning the same lesson from the opposite side of the door. When you treat someone as temporary long enough, you shouldn't be surprised when they decide to leave permanently. The last message from Caleb Whitmore arrived on a Sunday morning, short, careful, stripped of the entitlement that once colored every word he sent me. And when I read it, I noticed how unfamiliar his restraint felt, how even his apologies now sounded like negotiations wrapped in regret. And instead of responding, I set my phone down and finished my coffee, because some chapters do not need commentary to be complete. Life settled into a rhythm I had not known before, a quiet competence shaped by my own choices rather than other people's expectations, and each day confirmed what I had suspected all along. That peace is not loud. It does not announce itself. It simply arrives when you stop abandoning yourself for the sake of harmony. Marion Holt visited often, bringing bread or news or nothing at all, and one afternoon as we sat on the porch watching the light change, she said, "You know they're telling people you were manipulated." And I smiled, not because the accusation was kind, but because it no longer mattered, because reputations built on convenience collapse eventually under their own weight. Robert Hale called once more to confirm there were no remaining filings, no appeals, no loose ends, and when he said, "You are fully protected," I thanked him and realized that for the first time in my adult life, protection was something I had chosen rather than provided. Lydia Whitmore never reached out directly, but I heard through others that she had begun framing the situation as a misunderstanding, that she spoke of reconciliation in vague terms while quietly searching for stability elsewhere. And that detail, more than anything, told me I had read her correctly from the start. Control without leverage dissolves quickly. Caleb faded from my days not with drama, but with distance, the way someone slowly realizes the world will not rearrange itself for them anymore. And though I carried no hatred for him, I also carried no obligation to soften the lesson, because love without boundaries is not love at all, it is erasure. In the stillness of my new home, I took inventory of who I was becoming, not the caretaker, not the anchor, not the silent fixer, but a leaner Whitmore, a woman who had finally stepped out of the role she had been assigned without her consent. And I noticed how differently my body moved, how my breath came easier, how my thoughts no longer bent toward anticipation of other people's needs. I planted herbs in the small garden, not because anyone expected meals from me, but because I enjoyed the act of growing something for myself. And each morning I reminded myself that generosity is only virtuous when it is freely chosen, not extracted through guilt or tradition. The old house sold quickly, the buyers happy, the chapter closed cleanly, and when I passed by the neighborhood once and felt nothing tug at me, I knew I had truly left it behind. One evening, as the sun dipped low and Marian asked if I missed my son, I answered honestly, I miss who I thought he was. And that truth did not wound me the way it once might have, because clarity has a way of easing grief by naming it accurately. What I learned through all of this was simple and costly. Loyalty is not proven by endurance alone, family is not defined by blood when respect is absent, and silence, when used too long, teaches people the wrong lessons about access. I did not win anything by walking away. I reclaimed what had always been mine, the right to choose my own life, my own limits, my own peace. And that reclamation was worth more than any inheritance, any apology offered too late. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of a boundary you've been afraid to draw or a silence you've outgrown, then let it serve as proof that it is never too late to choose yourself. And if you want more stories about quiet strength, hard-earned clarity, and the moments that change everything, don't forget to like and subscribe, because sometimes the most powerful endings are the ones where we finally begin.